Something didn't go the way you planned. The deal fell apart. The relationship ended. The job disappeared. The venture you poured yourself into collapsed. And now you're standing in the wreckage of it, trying to figure out what happens next. And the first thing you did, the very first thing, was ask the wrong question. You asked, why me? You asked, why now? You asked, how am I ever going to recover from this? And those questions feel natural. They feel almost required. But I want to tell you tonight that those questions are traps. And the people who ask them tend to stay stuck in the very place they most want to leave. Here's the truth that nobody wants to sit with. A setback is not the end of your story. A setback is a plot point. It's a turn in the road. And what happens after the turn depends entirely on one thing. And it's not luck, and it's not timing, and it's not who comes to rescue you. It's the question you decide to ask. Because the person who asks, why did this happen to me, gets an answer designed to keep them small. But the person who asks, what is this here to teach me, gets an answer designed to make them large. Same setback, same wreckage, two completely different futures, decided by nothing more than the direction you point your mind. Now, I've watched a lot of people go through hard seasons. I've watched fortunes disappear. I've watched careers end. I've watched people lose the things they thought they couldn't live without. And here's what I noticed, and it took me years to understand it. The setback itself never determined what happened next. Two people would go through the exact same kind of loss, same size, same shape, and one of them would be finished, broken. They'd spend the next 10 years telling everyone who'd listen about the terrible thing that happened to them, and the other one would take that same loss and build something out of it that they never could have built otherwise. And I'd think, how is that possible? Same event, same weight, completely opposite outcome. And what I finally figured out is that a setback is neutral. It doesn't come with a meaning attached to it. It doesn't arrive stamped with instructions that say, this ruins you, or this makes you. The meaning gets assigned later, and it gets assigned by you. And most people assign the wrong meaning without ever realizing they had a choice. They think the meaning is obvious. They think, this was a disaster, therefore my life is a disaster. But that's not obvious at all. That's just the first interpretation that came to mind. And they grabbed it because it was closest, the same way you grab the nearest thing when you fall. Let me tell you about a young man I once knew. He'd built up a small business over several years, put everything he had into it, and then he lost it. Not through anything dramatic, just a slow erosion, a series of decisions that didn't work out, a market that shifted underneath him. And by the end, he had nothing, less than nothing, because he had debts on top of the empty hands. Now, here's the interesting part. When I talked to him in those first weeks, he could only talk about the loss. Everything he said pointed backward. What he'd had, what he'd lost, whose fault it was, how unfair the timing had been. He was living inside the setback. He'd moved in. He'd unpacked his bags and hung pictures on the wall of the very thing that was destroying him. And I said to him, I understand you lost the business, but what did the business teach you before it left? And he looked at me like I'd asked him a foolish question. He said, it taught me that I'm not cut out for this. And I said, no, that's not a lesson. That's a verdict, and you gave it to yourself. Let's find the actual lessons. And when we sat down and started digging, it turned out that failed business had taught him more than any success ever could have. It taught him exactly which decisions had drained his money. It taught him which kind of customer was worth having and which kind cost more than they were worth. It taught him how to read a contract, how to spot a bad partner, how to see trouble coming before it arrived. He had paid an enormous tuition, and he was about to walk away without collecting the education. That's what most people do with a setback. They pay the full price and then refuse to pick up what they bought. They go through the pain, they endure the loss, and then they run from the situation as fast as they can, never stopping to gather the one thing that would make the whole ordeal worthwhile, which is the wisdom. And I understand why. It hurts to look at it. It's uncomfortable to examine the thing that wounded you. Every instinct says to look away, to move on, to put it behind you. But if you put it behind you without extracting the lesson, you haven't put it behind you at all. You've just made sure you'll meet it again in a different costume further down the road. Here's a principle I want you to carry with you. The setback is the tuition. The lesson is the education. And most people pay the tuition and skip the class. Think about how absurd that would be in any other context. Imagine paying for 4 years of school and then never attending a single lecture. Imagine handing over everything you had for an education and then walking away the moment the first hard subject came up. Nobody would do that on purpose. And yet that's exactly what people do with the most expensive lessons life ever offers them. The loss already happened. The price has already been charged to your account. You can't undo it. You can't get a refund. So the only question that matters now is whether you're going to collect what you paid for or let it go to waste. And I promise you, there is something in that loss worth collecting. There always is. But you have to be willing to walk back into the room you most want to avoid and sit with it long enough to find it. That young man I mentioned, he eventually did walk back into the room. He sat down and he wrote out every single mistake he'd made, every decision that had cost him. And instead of using that list to punish himself, he used it as a map. He knew with a precision most people never achieve exactly what not to do next time. And the next thing he built on the foundation of everything the first thing had taught him. And it worked. It worked better than the first one ever had. Now here's what I want you to notice about that. He didn't succeed the second time in spite of his failure. He succeeded because of it. The failure was the ingredient. Without it, he'd have made the same mistakes all over again in the new venture. The setback wasn't an obstacle in his path. It was preparation for the path. He just couldn't see that while he was standing in the middle of it. And that's the hardest part, isn't it? You can't see the purpose of the setback while you're inside it. In the moment, it looks like pure loss, pure damage, pure unfairness. The meaning only reveals itself later, when you've climbed high enough to look back down and see how the whole thing fit together. So here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to trust in the middle of the difficulty that there's a purpose you can't yet see. Not in some vague, comforting way. I'm asking you to actively go looking for the purpose, to treat the setback like a coded message that you have the job of decoding. Because the people who recover from setbacks and the people who get buried by them are separated by exactly this. The buried ones ask, why is this happening? And they use the answer as evidence against themselves. The recovered ones ask, what is this making possible? And they use the answer as raw material for what comes next. Now let me shift for a moment, because I want to address something that keeps people stuck longer than anything else. It's the story they tell about what happened. Not the event itself, but the story wrapped around the event. Because here's what you have to understand. You don't actually live in the setback. You live in the story you tell about the setback. And those are two very different things. The setback is a set of facts. The business closed, the relationship ended, the plan failed. Those are just facts, and facts by themselves have no power to keep you down. But the story is where all the weight lives. The story is where you take the facts and add the interpretation, the meaning, the conclusion about who you are. The story says, this proves I'm not good enough. The story says, this is what always happens to me. The story says, this is the moment everything went wrong and it's never going to be right again. And you carry that story around like it's the truth, when really it's just one arrangement of the facts, and you chose it. I've seen two people describe the exact same event in ways so different you'd swear they were talking about different lives. One says, I got fired and it destroyed me. The other says, I got fired and it was the push I needed to finally do what I'd been afraid to do. Same fact, same firing. But one turned it into a wound and the other turned it into a doorway. And the difference wasn't in what happened. The difference was in the story. And here's the part that's hard to accept because it puts the responsibility right back on your shoulders. You are the author of the story, not the person who fired you, not the partner who left, not the market that turned. You're the one holding the pen. And most people don't realize they're holding it. So they write a tragedy without ever knowing they had the option to write something else. Now, I'm not telling you to lie to yourself. I'm not asking you to pretend the setback didn't hurt or to slap a cheerful label on real pain. That's not authorship. That's denial. And denial is just another way of refusing to deal with the facts. What I'm telling you is that within the truth, within the honest facts of what actually happened, there is always more than one story available. And you get to choose which one you build your life on. The tragedy is available. It's always available. You can pick up the facts of your setback and arrange them into a story about how you were wronged, how you failed, how the world is against you. That story is true enough. You can defend it. You can find plenty of evidence for it. But the comeback is also available, and it's built from the same facts. It says, here is what happened, and here is what I learned, and here is what I'm going to do because of it. That story is also true. It's also defensible. It also has plenty of evidence. The facts don't care which story you tell, but your future cares enormously. So the first real work of turning a setback into your best year is the work of rewriting the story. And I mean rewriting it deliberately, on purpose, with full knowledge of what you're doing. You take the facts, all of them, the hard ones included, and you ask, what is the most useful, true story I can tell about this? Not the most pleasant, the most useful. Because a useful story pulls you forward, and a tragic story pins you down. I knew a young woman who'd gone through a painful ending in her personal life, the kind that leaves you questioning everything. And for a long while, the story she told was simple. I wasted years on the wrong person, and now I'm behind, and I'll never get that time back. And every time she told it, you could see it drain a little more life out of her. The story was a slow poison taken in daily doses. And one day I asked her to tell me the same set of facts, but with a different ending. Not a false ending, a different true one. And it took her a while, but eventually she said, those years taught me exactly what I need and exactly what I won't tolerate. I know myself now in a way I never did before. I'm not behind, I'm prepared. Same years, same ending. But now the story was fuel instead of poison, and you could see it the moment she said it. She sat up straighter. Something came back into her eyes. Nothing about the past had changed. Not one fact was different. But the meaning had changed. And the meaning is what she'd actually been living inside all along. She'd been imprisoned by an interpretation, and the moment she chose a different interpretation, the cell door opened. It had never been locked. She'd just never tried the handle. Now, I want to be practical about this, because I don't want you to leave here thinking that Turning a setback around is just a matter of thinking pretty thoughts. It isn't. The story is where it starts, but the story alone won't rebuild anything. After you've rewritten the story, you have to act inside the new story. And that's where the real construction happens. Here's how I want you to think about the season right after a setback. It's the most fertile ground you will ever stand on. I know that sounds strange. I know it sounds backward, but hear me out. When everything is going well, you don't change. Why would you? Comfort doesn't demand growth. When the money's coming in and the plans are working and life is smooth, you stay exactly as you are because there's no pressure to become anything else. Success, for all its pleasures, is a terrible teacher. It rarely teaches you anything because it rarely forces you to. But a setback breaks the pattern. It shatters the routine you'd been sleepwalking through. It rips away the comfortable assumptions and leaves you standing there, awake, forced to think, forced to decide, forced to become someone you weren't before. The very thing that feels like destruction is actually the plow breaking up hard ground so that something new can be planted. You can't plant in packed earth. You need it broken first, and the setback is the breaking. So the question isn't whether the ground has been disturbed. It has. The question is what you're going to plant in it now that it's open, because it won't stay open forever. Fertile ground that goes unplanted grows weeds. It fills with whatever seeds happen to blow in on the wind. And in a human life, the weeds that blow in are bitterness, resentment, self-pity, and fear. If you don't deliberately plant something better, those weeds will take the whole field. That's why the season right after a setback is so decisive. You have a window, and in that window, you're more capable of change than you'll be at any other time in your life. Your old identity has been loosened. Your old habits have been interrupted. Your old assumptions are lying on the ground. You are, for a brief and precious period, genuinely open to becoming someone new. And most people waste that window mourning what they lost instead of building what they could gain. Let me give you a picture of what it looks like to use the window instead of wasting it. There was a man I once knew who lost nearly everything in a single bad year. His work, his savings, a good portion of his health. By every external measure, that was the worst year of his life. And for the first few months, he treated it that way. He grieved, he withdrew, he let the weeds start to grow. But then something shifted. He decided that since his old life was gone anyway, he might as well use the emptiness to build the life he'd actually wanted all along, but had been too comfortable to pursue. The setback had cleared the field, and instead of standing in the empty field crying about the crop he'd lost, he started planting the crop he'd always dreamed of. And 2 years later, he told me that terrible year had been the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to become the person he'd been putting off becoming his whole life. Now understand, he didn't say that in the middle of the terrible year. In the middle of it, it was just terrible. He said it 2 years later, looking back, when he could finally see what the loss had made room for. And this is the thing about setbacks, that you have to take on faith while you're inside them. The meaning arrives late. You have to keep moving forward before you can see why the setback happened. And if you wait until you understand it before you take action, you'll wait forever. So you act first, you plant first, you rebuild first, and the understanding comes later as a reward for having moved. That's the sequence, and most people get it backward. They wait to understand before they move, and so they never move, and so they never understand. Let me talk now about the specific way a setback changes you, because I don't want you to think the only thing you gain is a lesson or a story. You gain something more valuable than either. You gain a different self. The person who walks into a setback is not the same person who walks out of it, provided they walk out of it correctly. Something happens to you in the difficulty that can't happen any other way. You develop a kind of strength that comfort could never have given you. You find out what you're actually made of, which is something you can never learn while everything is easy. Before the setback, you had theories about yourself. You thought you knew how strong you were. You thought you knew what you could handle, but those were just theories, untested, unproven. The setback is the test. And when you come through it, you're no longer operating on theory. You know. You have proof. You've seen yourself survive something you were afraid might destroy you, and that knowledge changes how you carry yourself for the rest of your life. There's a particular kind of confidence that only comes from having been broken and having rebuilt. It's quieter than the confidence of someone who's never been tested. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's the confidence of someone who has looked at the worst and thought, I survived that. Whatever comes next, I can handle it too. And you cannot buy that confidence. And you cannot fake it, and you cannot inherit it. You can only earn it in the exact place you least want it to be. So the setback isn't just teaching you lessons and handing you a better story. It's forging you into someone sturdier, someone deeper, someone who's been through the fire and knows they can walk through it again. That person is worth far more than the person you were before. And the only way to become that person was through the very thing you'd have avoided if you'd had the choice. This is why I say the setback can become the best thing that ever happened to you. And I don't say it lightly, and I don't say it to comfort you. I say it because I've watched it happen too many times to doubt it. The people I most admire, the ones with real substance, real depth, real steadiness, almost every one of them was forged in a setback. The ones who never faced anything hard tend to be brittle, shallow, easily rattled. It's the ones who've been broken and rebuilt who have something you can lean on. Now let me get very practical, because I've given you the philosophy and I don't want to leave you without the blueprint. What do you actually do starting tomorrow to turn this setback into your best year? Let me give it to you piece by piece. The first thing you do is extract the lesson before you do anything else. I mean this literally. Before you make a single plan for the future, you sit down with paper and you write out everything the setback taught you. Every mistake you can identify. Every warning sign you ignored. Every decision that in hindsight you'd make differently. You do this not to punish yourself, but to harvest the tuition you already paid. And you have to be honest here, brutally honest, because this is the one place where honesty pays the highest dividend. If you soften the lessons, if you protect your ego, if you blame everyone but yourself, you leave the most valuable lessons on the table. The lessons that sting the most are usually the ones worth the most. So you go looking for the ones that hurt, and you write them down, and you keep them because they are your protection against making the same expensive mistakes again. The second thing you do is rewrite the story on purpose. You take the honest facts of what happened, all of them, and you deliberately construct the most useful true story you can build from them. You don't lie. You don't minimize the pain. But you refuse to leave the story as a tragedy when a comeback is equally available from the same facts. You write it down too, the new story, so you can read it back to yourself on the days you forget which story you chose. Because you will forget. On the hard days, the old tragic story will come creeping back and it'll sound like the truth and you'll be tempted to believe it again. That's when you pull out the story you wrote when you were thinking clearly and you read it. And you remind yourself which version you decided to live in. It's the same principle as making a decision before the difficult moment arrives. You author the story when you're strong so it can carry you when you're weak. The third thing you do is treat the cleared ground as an opportunity, not a graveyard. This is the mental shift that changes everything. You've been looking at the emptiness left by the setback as a place where something died. I want you to start looking at it as a place where something can be born. The field is open. The old crop is gone. What are you going to plant? And here's where you get to dream a little, even in the middle of the hardship, because the setback didn't just take things away. It also removed constraints you'd forgotten were there. That job you lost was also holding you in place. That relationship that ended was also keeping you from a different future. That business that failed was also consuming energy you can now spend elsewhere. The loss opened up space, and space is where new things grow. So you ask yourself, what could I build now that I couldn't build before? What was I too comfortable, too busy, too settled to pursue when everything was going fine? The setback has handed you a rare kind of freedom. The freedom of someone with nothing left to protect. Use it. Most people never get this freedom because they never lose enough to be released from what was holding them. You've been released. Don't waste the release. The fourth thing you do is take one action immediately before you feel ready, before you've healed, before the pain has faded. And this is critical, so pay attention. The instinct after a setback is to wait until you feel better before you start rebuilding. To take time to recover, to process, to get yourself together. And some of that is fine, but there's a trap in it. Because the feeling of being ready doesn't come from resting, it comes from acting. You don't wait until you feel strong and then take action. You take action, and the strength shows up because you acted. Movement generates the very momentum and confidence you've been waiting to feel before you move. So if you wait for the feeling, you'll wait forever. And the field will fill with weeds while you sit there waiting to feel ready to plant. One action. Small is fine. Small is good. Make the call. Send the letter. Take the first step of the new thing, however tiny. Because the moment you take action, you stop being a victim of the setback and you become the author of what comes next. Action is the thing that flips your role in the story. Before you act, the setback is happening to you. The moment you act, you are happening to your life. And here's what you'll find, and this is one of the truest things I know. The action you take doesn't have to be big to change everything. It just has to be real. One real step, taken while you still feel broken, does more to heal you than a month of sitting still and waiting to feel whole. Because that one step tells your own mind a new story. It says, I'm not finished. I'm still moving. This setback did not stop me. And your mind believes what your actions demonstrate, far more than it believes what your feelings insist. Now, I want to address the timing of all this, because I've thrown the phrase, your best year around. And I want to make sure you understand what I mean by it. I'm not promising you that the year after your setback will feel good. It might not. It might be hard and slow and full of doubt. Feeling good is not what makes a year your best year. Your best year is the year you grow the most, the year you become the most, the year you plant the seeds that every future harvest will grow from. And those years, the truly foundational ones, almost never feel good while you're in them. They feel like work. They feel like struggle. They feel like uncertainty. It's only later looking back that you recognize them as the best years, because you can finally see everything they produced. So don't measure the year by how it feels. Measure it by what you're building. Measure it by who you're becoming. A year can be painful and still be the best year of your life if it's the year you turned a loss into a foundation. And I'd take one of those hard foundational years over 10 smooth, comfortable, empty ones. Because the smooth years give you nothing to stand on later. The hard years give you everything. There's a phrase I want you to hold on to, and it's this: the setback is not what happened to you. The setback is what you do with what happened to you. The event is fixed. It's already occurred. But the setback, the real setback, the lasting one, only exists if you let the event stop you. And an event that doesn't stop you isn't a setback at all. It's just a chapter. A hard chapter, but a chapter. And chapters keep turning. The only way an event becomes a permanent setback is if you decide it's the end. If you set down your pen and refuse to write the next chapter. And a lot of people do exactly that. They let one hard chapter become the whole book. They spend the rest of their lives rereading the page where things fell apart, never turning it, never writing what comes after. And they call that page their life. When really, it was just one page they refused to leave. Don't be the person who refuses to turn the page. The pen is in your hand. The next chapter is unwritten. And the beauty of an unwritten chapter is that it can be anything. The setback closed one door, but it didn't close them all. It couldn't. There are more doors than you can count. And you've been so fixed on the one that closed that you haven't noticed the others standing open all around you. So here's what I want you to do when you leave here tonight. I want you to take the setback you've been carrying, the one that's been weighing on you, the one you came in here still nursing, and I want you to do the work. Not tomorrow, tonight, while it's fresh. Sit down with paper. Write out every lesson the setback taught you, honestly, even the ones that sting. Then write the new story, the useful, true one, the comeback instead of the tragedy. Then ask yourself what the cleared ground makes possible that wasn't possible before. And then, before you go to sleep, decide on one action you'll take tomorrow, one real step into the new chapter, and commit to taking it whether you feel ready or not. Because that's how a setback becomes your best year. Not through time, not through luck, not through waiting for the pain to fade. Through the deliberate work of harvesting the lesson, rewriting the story, planting the cleared field, and moving before you feel ready to move. The setback already happened. That part is out of your hands. But everything after the setback, all of it, every bit of what comes next, is still entirely in your hands. And the person who understands that, who really takes it into their bones, is a person no setback can defeat. Because they've learned the one secret that changes everything. They've learned that the loss is only the beginning of the story. And they are the ones who get to decide how it ends.